Turn our attention to Adel Iskander. He's live in Washington, D.C. He's a Middle East analyst. And can you hear us, Adel? We want to thank you for joining us. There you are.
Thank you.
We were just talking about whether this is a revolution or a coup in Egypt and why this is such a blow to democracy. I'd like to get your thoughts on that as well.
Well, I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I think the debate about whether it's a coup or a revolution can go on indefinitely. What we do understand is that it's probably a hybrid of the two. I mean, there were the toppling of Mubarak, while it came on the heels of a very, very large and substantial, a popular uprising that lasted for 18 days, was effectively the product of the Supreme Council for the Armed Forces nudging Mubarak out of the way. So arguably what happened with the removal of Mubarak was itself a little bit of a mini coup on the heels of a major popular uprising. What seems to have happened in Egypt a week ago with the removal of Morsi by the Minister of Defense, who arguably he had appointed himself, also comes on the heels of a fairly substantial revolutionary movement. Again, we're back to this semantic argument. I think it's less interesting to try and give it a name than it is to actually talk about what it might produce in the period that follows. Is there a possibility for democratic institutions to become enshrined? Can this interim period produce the kind of sort of constitutional amendments that can bring together Egyptians rather than divide them? We've seen the last year become probably the year that is most characteristic of polarization. Egyptians no longer see eye to eye in the same way that they did in the period immediately after the removal of Mubarak, and there's a dire and desperate need for everybody to come together and devise a future for the country. Unfortunately, with the military at the helm, it doesn't seem to have reduced this polarization in any conceivable way, as your previous guest described. So it's going to be a tricky process, but I think at this point it's just really the Western media that are still concerned about whether to call it a coup or a revolution, and what that means as far as U.S. government funding for Egypt in the period to come. But Egyptians are essentially resolved that
Adel, I do want to obviously talk about whether it is a coup or a revolution, because obviously the big question is, will the U.S. actually cut off the $1 billion in foreign aid to Egypt, or is it too strategically critical that they can't do that? So your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I think the U.S. government is of two minds on this issue. I mean, again, Egypt is a major and substantial strategic partner in the region. It's a bulwark of the Camp David Accords and the treaty with Israel and safeguards that border, but it is also pretty substantial, heavyweight in the region. And so it's very difficult to retract the little bit of financial and military influence that the U.S. government has. At the end of the day, I think that even though there's a case to be made for the retraction of funding, at least the military component of that, the $1.3 billion, and we've seen Republican senators, John McCain and others, rally recently to try and retract this funding. Even if it is withdrawn, I imagine it'll be a very, very temporary and brief discontinuation that will come back again once there's a democratic process underway. So once the Constitution is being voted on in a referendum, or once we go to a parliamentary election, that these funds will begin to stream again to the Egyptian state. So I think it's managing the interim period.
You stay right with us. I got a question right now for Dr. Fahmy. How will withdrawing this money affect Egyptians if the U.S. decides to take back that $1.3 billion?
Well, again, the $1.3 billion is in military aid, so it's not going to directly affect the Egyptian population. The United States only gives them $250 million in economic aid.
Only $250.
But even if they withdraw, we've seen Saudi Arabia, Qatar, other countries have already heavily invested in Egypt just in the past couple of days. So in terms of interim transition, in terms of financial, the blow is not going to be felt. The United States is not going to withdraw the $1.3 billion. They've already Egypt's already met the minimum threshold The administration's already kind of moved away from talks of withdrawing the aid.
Well, I see, Dee Dee, you're shaking your head on that.
Yeah, because Senator McCain and Senator Graham and many others really feel we need to withdraw because that's the law. And so I would not be so sure that we're not going to withdraw the funds. It hasn't happened yet, but there's a great debate on that. And it's not good to reward bad behavior, and we do not support coups. So the United States should withdraw.
I have a question for the entire panel right now, and we haven't heard too much from our leaders here in the U.S. We haven't heard from the president or Kerry. What do you think about that, and why do you think they're remaining so silent on what is such a massive problem in Egypt right now? We've seen 10 days of just horrible bloodshed there.
Well, they're actually both on vacation right now.
That's great.
Sometimes,
but the United States does have a history of supporting coups. We did it in Iran. We did it in Chile. We did it in the Congo. We did it in Indonesia. And so we have done this in the past. We're just getting our hand caught in the cookie jar this time because of the new media that surrounds it. So the fact that the United States is remaining silent is very interesting.
Well, not everyone's remaining silent. Again, President Obama is being cautious, but the Republicans are speaking very loudly about this and against this.
Not the Republicans on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They've already accepted that this is not a
Senator McCain and Lindsey Graham, and they're not accepting it. They're very much against this because we don't support coups. You say that. However, this is a time when it's escalated. This is, as you said, even with social media, and everyone's very aware of it. So they're watching what we're doing, what the United States is doing, and it's important. It also gives us a seat at the table because if we withdraw the funds, it gives us a little bit of leverage to try to perhaps help move it along the process, bringing the groups together.
Dr. Fahmy and Dee Dee, we want to go back to Adele Iskander in D.C. right now, Middle East analyst. And Adele, if you can tell us, what do you think about this? Do you think that our leaders are being silent right now, or cautiously silent, we will say?
I think to a large extent they're trying to read the political scene in Egypt. Keep in mind this is not just a discussion that's going on here in Washington, D.C., but rather being determined by the political players on the ground. The Muslim Brotherhood are rallying in the streets and have done so in the last few days to articulate and really make the case that this is a coup and not a revolution, that they represent the majority. And so they've brought out hundreds of thousands, if not more, into the streets to make that statement loud and clear and to push Washington in that direction of recognizing Morsi's presidency and really sort of disowning the military's interim plan. So really kind of pushing it in that direction, which of course would affirm the retraction of funding from the military. And on the other hand, you've got the folks who are supportive of the removal of Morsi coming out and saying, well, you know what, these funds are actually a drop in the bucket. We don't really need them. They're minuscule in comparison to the funds that we're getting elsewhere. And as far as the dominion of the military itself, I mean, if they run between 30 and 40% of the national economy, then what's 1.3 billion? It's really quite, it's really crumbs on the table at the end of the day. So really, it's important for the leaders to have their ear on the ground to try and figure out what's being said in Egypt before they take the necessary measures. At the end of the day, the chorus out of Egypt, whether it's on the pro-Morsi side or anti-Morsi side, seems to be extremely demonizing of the United States, either position or lack of position. So
Adele,
the equivocation is not really paying fruit.
Adele, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to ask you another question, and I want to ask the same question to Dr. Fahmy, and just so that you know that Dee Dee was sitting here shaking her head saying, withdraw that $1.3 billion,
especially
as you were talking.
Deal. If he's saying it's no big deal, a drop in the bucket, why not?
All right, but I do want to ask another question, and that is, what are the Egyptians' feelings on the coverage here in the in the U.S.? Do they feel that their voices are being heard? Okay, Dr. Fahmy, if you can take that, and we'll see if we can get that connection back with Adele. What do you think about the coverage here in the U.S.? Do you think that the Egyptians feel that their voices are being heard, and do you think that they think it's fair?
Well, there was a lot of coverage the first couple of days, and then it's kind of gone away. But there's been a lot of social media directed at the United States from some of the protesters and revolutionaries in the street saying, "United States, stay out." Right? This is our revolution, this is our moment, this is our coup, whatever it is, stay out. And so there's been a lot of these small clips, but that's from the people on the street or from a limited group. those that have come to power in Egypt right now still have a very close relationship with the administration, still have a very close ear that needs to be listened to, and the relationship is not going to be severed anytime soon.
Dee, final thoughts on this?
Well, I don't think it should be severed, but I still think we need to pull the money, especially since everyone's saying it's not a big deal. So, you know, why should we be funding
because we have
government
friends in
with
the neighborhood
military?
that won't let us.
Well, we'll see about that. We'll see what happens. But, you know, hopefully, obviously, we want peace in the Middle East, and of course, we wish our Egyptian friends well.
Absolutely, because it certainly is in turmoil there. We hate to see anything like that. Adele Iskander in D.C., final thoughts from you.
At the end of the day, I think the advice, the take-home advice here is listen to what the Egyptians have to say. They may be polarized, but that's the nature of politics. So that's where decisions should come from. And so long as they're consistent with our values, then we should move forward. If not, then we should go back to the drawing board and revisit our relationship with Egypt as a whole, as a public, as military institutions, as economic interests, and everything else.
And we certainly do hope for peace in Egypt as well. Adele Iskander in D.C., thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. Dr. Fahmy, thank you as well. And Dee, as always, a pleasure. And don't go away, everyone. When we come back, we're going to be taking a look at what's being called the trial of the century. 6 women are now deciding the fate of George Zimmerman. Did he shoot 17-year-old Trayvon Martin because he had to or because he wanted to? Was it self-defense is the question jurors must now decide.